Hello, everybody. Welcome back. So let's talk about Mike Rowe, he of Dirty Jobs fame. Now, this might seem like a little bit of a weird or a strange subject to cover, but it's something I've wanted to talk about for a little while now. But every time I would think about doing an episode on Mike Rowe, it seemed like it was kind of coming out of nowhere because Mike Rowe isn't really, all over pop culture, all over the news and everything. It just never felt very relevant, I guess. But he recently, I guess about a week ago at this point, maybe a little bit less, he appeared on the Joe Rogan Experience, everybody's favorite podcast, the biggest podcast in the world. So it bumped the episode, or bumped the subject up the list. So first off, just on a professional level, I have no respect for what Mike Rowe does. And by professional level, I don't mean like we're both on the same professional track or something like that, but just, I mean, Mike Rowe as a professional spokesman, as a professional person, I don't like what he's doing. I'm sure he's a kind neighbor, a good son, a good family man if he has a family. If he has kids, I'm sure he's a good father. If he has a wife, I'm sure he's a good husband. I'm sure he's a great friend, neighbor, everything else. I'll stipulate all of that to be true. But professionally, as a spokesperson, I guess he's been a spokesperson for the working class, I don't respect what he does. Now, I suspect that some of you, if you've hit this point, are wondering like what gives about Mike Rowe? He's just a dude who did a TV show, right? You're wondering why I'm even doing this. Well, the reason why I dislike this guy so much is that he uses genuine labor and worker-related issues, genuine labor concerns, and genuine concerns of the poor and the disenfranchised, and he uses them to push a conservative, anti-worker, anti-labor agenda. Now, I understand that for a lot of people, this might seem a little strange. They see Mike Rowe out there, bringing attention to dirty jobs, to blue-collar work, to the working class, to all these jobs that this entire category of jobs, right, which are often very hard, very dirty. They're performed like kind of beneath the surface. They're unseen. And they're always super underappreciated. And he's built his career bringing light to that. So how can any of that be wrong? Well, on the surface, there's nothing wrong with this. There's nothing wrong with highlighting these sorts of jobs. There's nothing wrong with promoting trades. There's nothing wrong with showing dirty jobs and how they work and who does them and what those jobs mean for the society that we live in. There's nothing wrong with sort of discussing and talking about, like I say, highlighting just sort of this general blue-collar work, blue-collar employment. Now, I myself am, in fact, a blue-collar worker. I have been for my entire life. I come from a largely blue-collar family. I started working when I was 16. My first job was at an inner-city scrapyard. You don't get much more dirty than that job. You don't get much more blue-collar than that job. You don't get much more working class than that job. And I eventually became a truck driver, and now I drive an 18-wheeler to pay the bills. I have no beef with trade work or blue collar work or dirty work or manual labor or anything like that. Learning a trade for me, getting a CDL, a commercial driver's license, it set me on a course to make a solid living, to have a house, and it didn't really directly lead to having a wife, because you can obviously fall in love at any job you do. But I have, a wife, I have 3 dogs. I've built a decent life for myself. And when I was young, when I was coming out of high school, I was kind of I don't know, directionless, I guess, coming out. And learning a trade and being exposed to trades, it gave me a decent life. So please don't misconstrue any point I'm about to make, anything I'm about to say as being against blue collar work, or against dirty jobs, against the working class, or anything like that. Even if I stumble on my words, which I do sometimes, even if I poorly phrase something, please give me the benefit of the doubt, because I would never disparage blue collar workers or really any workers at all. So as far as Mike Rowe, if I don't have a problem with sort of the general surface level messaging of what he's done, of the show Dirty Jobs, where most of us know him from, or just from really the surface level analysis, or not even analysis, but just if you just hear him talk one time for 10 minutes, it doesn't sound all that bad. But what he does is he injects and drags along some deeply very right-wing, very conservative, very anti-labor, anti-union, and really anti-blue-collar worker ideology along the way. He smuggles it in under like that, that crooked, endearing smile that he has, under the strategically placed dirt smudges on his face, under the well-worn blue jeans that he's always wearing and his down-home humor, right? Not to mention the voice that makes grown men weak in the knees. And a genuine charisma. He really does have a genuine charisma. And the ideology that he kind of so fluidly mixes into his work is the thing that I really want to address here in this episode. And I guess to do that, I want to start by going back in time just a little bit. I don't want to break this guy's whole life down, like I said before. I don't really care what he does in his personal life. I'm not even all that interested in the minutia of his career. But I do want to go to, I guess, where he started his acting career, right? So Mike Rowe, this entire time, has sort of been a theater kid cosplaying as a blue-collar worker for 2 decades, a little over 2 decades now. And he's been using that character to smuggle those right-wing talking points, that right-wing ideology, that anti-union, anti-worker, anti-labor ideology and worldview into the trades. He's been sneaking it in. And by the way, I called him a theater kid. I say that with all the love in the world, no hate or shade to the theater kids. Y'all are cool. We love you here. No beef from Tribunus Plebes. But now, like I said a few times, I don't want to break down this guy's life like that. But I do think that we should mention that he got started in the opera and singing, well, or not and singing, singing at the opera and into the theater group that he worked in to get into a union, right? He went to a small theater company because, well, I mean, first of all, that voice, right? I mean, so deep and sultry. I love it. But he went there mostly because their small union would allow him to get into SAG or AFTRA at the time. They were at this time they were separate unions. He'd able to get into them to pursue commercials and TV work, which is what he really wanted to do. And he could do that by what was sort of like a backdoor kind of a cheat to get into the SAG and AFTRA. If you joined the theater group union, which I forget what it was called right now, but you'll see coming up in a second, he'll say it. You could essentially buy your way into SAG and AFTRA once you were in this smaller union, right? So it's sort of a shortcut to get there. He even goes so far as to say, when he talks about his time at the opera, that he bluffed his way in, that he faked his way in. He didn't really know what he was doing, but he wanted to get that union card. He went there because he wanted insurance, which was part of it, and that's a big deal, by the way, but he also went there to get that back door to the union.
Can we begin with the Baltimore Opera? How did that happen?
It's a crooked road. Let's see, the opera was 1984, and back in Baltimore in 1984, the unions were a very big deal. You know, I wanted to work in acting and commercials, and I had to be in the Screen Actors Guild or in the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists, right? But I couldn't get into either union because you can't, at least back then, you couldn't do that kind of work unless you were in the union, but you couldn't do the union work unless you had your union card, and you couldn't get your union card unless you had done the work. And anyhow, there was a loophole. There was another union called AGMA, American Guild of Musical Artists. And if you can get into that guild, you can buy your membership into the other guilds, and that guild oversaw the opera.
So the opera and the unions gave this garbage pile a career which made him very rich and very famous and very influential. And then he turns around and he spends his later years of pretty big celebrity and, you know, pretty big wealth. He's a pretty rich man. He's not, you know, Warren Buffett rich, but he's got some money. And he's been using it to go on every talk show and podcast that he can to routinely defame unions and even kind of dumping on his time in the theater. And this, by the way, as a very, very brief aside, is sort of the standard playbook for conservatives and libertarians. They take advantage of things that sometimes literally save their lives, and then they spend the rest of their time, because of an ideological drive to get rid of them, trying to eliminate and destroy the very things that allowed them to climb their way out of whatever situations they were in. And so eventually Mike Rowe ends up with this show, Dirty Jobs. And you know what? I watched a bunch of episodes of this show when it came out back in the day. And I even thought it could be interesting at times. And going back and looking at some old interviews and reading some old interviews that came out in the first couple of seasons of this show, the motivations that he gave in those interviews, they seem very genuine. He might be, you know, bullcrapping me or bullcrapping us or bullcrapping the people back then, but it really it comes off as a genuine concern and a genuine issue that he felt he was addressing and highlighting all of these shows. So I don't want to say that this is entirely, or at least that it didn't start entirely as a grift or a lie. I really hope it didn't, because if it did, he completely tricked me and I'd feel like a fool, right? But I just think that even then, in coming up until what's going on now, he just has a deeply flawed, fundamentally flawed analysis of what's going on, and an extremely flawed supposed solution to these problems. And that the answers that he comes to are informed by that poor analysis. You know, it's like a garbage in, garbage out sort of situation. So this TV guy with a great voice, I admit, I am jealous, extremely jealous of a good, deep, resonant, rough voice. This dude going out and doing jobs that are closer to what I've done my whole life than anything else I usually see people doing on TV. It was a decent show. I didn't mind it, right? So like I said, my first job was at an inner city scrapyard. I cleaned sewers. I welded. I torch cut. I climbed like in the engine compartments of these big cable cranes we had that were just caked in filth and grease, and just like I remember I would take my shirt off because it would be so gross in there, and I'd be pressing my back into like an inch of grease and dirt and just trying to like work like a bolt that hadn't come out of that thing in like 3 years, trying to work it loose with like a 4-foot long ratchet. It was a ridiculous job. You know, like I busted cast iron with sledgehammers and stacked car and truck batteries all day. It just absurd stuff. 12 hours a day, 6 days a week for years on end. And I saw Mike Rowe doing these sorts of jobs, right? Just spending a day doing things that I would have been doing at the time. And I saw him talking to people who were doing jobs like me, just talking to, farmers and large equipment repairmen and just all these other people who were very much like the people that I knew. And eventually I started driving a truck for a living, right? And I saw Mike Rowe in big trucks and like, oh, hey, look, that guy's doing a thing similar to me. And, I know that he obviously was an actor and he wasn't really doing these jobs. I get it. Every time I criticize this guy, people are like, well, he's an actor, right? Yeah, I get it. I understand how TV works. But still, it was nice to see this guy doing it and bringing light to the sort of jobs I did that nobody else saw. And being respectful about it, too, which is another big thing. And, all of that on Dirty Jobs, the show was fine. It was, sometimes interesting. It was never really offensive. It was, it was okay. It was all right. It was fine. And Rowe himself came off as, I thought, pretty sincere at the time. Pretty charming, pretty charismatic, right? He had a lot of charisma on screen. And again, it was all fine. And it was good for a season or two, maybe even less than that, because, the format never changed. It was just different dirty jobs. The camera work never changed. The host, the narration was always the same. It just got old after a while, right? It wore out. And this isn't really a huge criticism I have. It happens. I mean, what the hell else can you do with a format like that, right? It's just reality TV. It's like a procedural cop show, right? Except reality TV. It's just step after step after step every episode, and it's successful for as long as people care. And whatever. It was what it was. And by being what it was, it made Mike Rowe extremely famous. It made Mike Rowe rich. It also gave Mike Rowe what is, at least to me, and this is one of the kind of weird things that I'm going to hit on a lot here, I think, today. It gave him like a very strange, like, working class prestige and an entire, like, dare I say, like, gravitas when it comes to talking about labor in this country. And it also inspired Rowe to focus on encouraging people to do these dirty jobs, to actually go out there and do them, to basically consider blue-collar work as a legitimate alternative to more, I guess at the time, is more of a traditional, like, a lot of people were like, go to college, get a degree, get into an office. And Mike Rowe encouraged people to consider another path, either via a trade school or apprenticeships in an industry. And all of that, speaking as somebody who barely made it out of high school, I hated school, I knew I wasn't going to go to college, and who right out of high school worked in or actually during high school and after, worked in a scrapyard, and who got a CDL, a commercial driver's license, by going to a local truck driving school. I can say that touting trades, not offering, but just putting it out there that it is another option. It's a good idea, right? Getting into a trade fundamentally changed my life. It gave me a lot of security. Now, I have no idea what I'd be doing right now if I did not get this license. Like, I can't conceive of the idea that I'd be working in an office. And even worse is I can't even fathom the idea that I'd still be working in that scrapyard or some adjacent company. I would have broken a long time ago. Without a CDL, I may have figured something cool out. I may not. I don't know. But learning that trade and getting that CDL that said this person can do this job, and I can go to 3 dozen companies around here with that license, say I can do this job, pay me to do it, and they will. They might not pay me as much as I make now, but I could get a job because of that trade. It gave me that path to having a little bit of security. a family, dogs, house, freedom, maybe even a chance at like a real retirement. And I know I mentioned this stuff before, but please don't think anywhere in here that I'm speaking down on this aspect of what Mike Rowe does. There's nothing wrong with presenting trade work and blue collar work and dirty jobs as legitimate options for anybody out there who's either getting into work, they're aging into it, or they're trying to change professions. I work with people who worked in white collar jobs, hated them, they were soul crushing, and they started driving a truck for a living, and they like it. They like it more than sitting in a cubicle. But what I do want to dump on here is everything that he smuggles into our minds along with that pretty basic idea. Everything that basic idea runs cover for is what I want to talk about. So out of one side of Mike Rowe's mouth, he talks about working trades, building infrastructure, and just about like that, providing another path forward for financial security for so many people like me. Out of the other side of his mouth, however, he spews right-wing, individualistic gospel, right? Individuality above all else. He talks about anti-union rhetoric and anti-regulation, anti-worker nonsense, and he does this all along with like sort of a blatantly pro-capital, pro-boss, pro-corporate worldview. And he is funded by conservative billionaires. He's funded by the corporations that make those conservative billionaires so massively wealthy. And he's funded by the think tanks, which pay him handsomely to do so, to smuggle this ideology into his work. And this is why he's a fixture on Fox News channels and why he recently made that appearance on Rogan. He didn't just pop up there randomly, right? Joe Rogan didn't say, "Oh my God, Mike Rowe is really interesting." I have no proof of this, but damn straight, a bunch of really wealthy people were reaching out for Mike Rowe to get him on that show. I absolutely guarantee it. So he uses this weirdly perceived blue-collar credibility that I was talking about, which is driven by his Dirty Jobs work, the Dirty Jobs show, and it has continued into the present day, where he's always wearing his denim jeans and his, Carhartt wardrobe, his worn-out baseball cap, and his down-home anecdotes, and that kind of aw shucks demeanor that he has when he's on TV. And he slathers at all of that with the false pretense of centrality, right? He plays both sides all the time unless it's a very safe subject for him. But even when he's kind of wavering, he always kind of skews towards the side of power. Every time. If you watch his interviews, just watch him talk. It's always power. And I guess that centrality, that trying to play like, oh, both sides are crazy. Oh my God, the conservatives and the liberals, oh, they're so wild. He always ends up debasing any sort of, even the liberal side, let alone like an actual leftist idea. And he always ends up at least leaning towards the conservative side. Everything that Mike Rowe discusses that he doesn't just kind of talk circles around and, sort of avoid taking a stance on, it just reaffirms that those conservative ideals just every single time, again and again. And we can see this on what I believe is his most recent attempt at a blue-collar worker focused show called How America Works, which aired on Fox Nation. Basically, it was just like another ripoff of Dirty Work, or Dirty Jobs. I think he's done a few things since then, but they're mostly like small web-based things that I think that they actually get more views on the web than this thing. But this was like a actual network show, right? I believe. But this show, it spent its entire run sort of focusing on how workers, or not how, but it showed workers serving capital. This wasn't as neutral as Dirty Jobs portrayed itself. It was just literally showing workers working under intense deadlines happily, and it was all for show for the camera. I guarantee it. None of these people wanted to be there. The shows were again formulaic, just like Dirty Jobs was. Not quite as bad, but they were still very formulaic. They showed, like I said, like they showed blue collar workers who'd be doing some difficult job like steel, logging, entertainment things. I think there's one about planes. And like every show, it'd be like, oh my God, we have this weird deadline we have to meet. We have this weird, manufacturing pressure that we need to cave to. I need the workers to get behind me. And all the workers would be like, oh yeah, we'll just work like 18 hours straight. And, I mean, it was just, it reeked of propaganda. It reeked of people working on, these entirely made up deadlines and pressures. It was just pure fake reality TV nonsense drama that was drummed up just to make the viewer a little bit more interested. But it also valorizes all the time workers pushing themselves to the physical and safety limits, really, if you think about it, to make sure that they please the bosses on camera and to make those bosses even more wealthy, which, whenever I stop to think about it, it's just pretty sick. It's pretty sick to do that. And the show itself was very publicly and obviously funded by people like Koch Industries and the Koch Foundation. It was also funded by API, which is an oil pipeline company. It was funded by Shell, Chambers of Commerce, and I think that there was one other oil company that I know funded it, but it was funded by big industry and especially energy companies. In episode 1, I got curious, so I looked up all the episodes. I think it was like 12 episodes in the one season it ran. But episode 1 was about the lumber industry, and Georgia Pacific is one of the largest forestry and paper businesses in America, and it is owned by, take a guess, Koch Industries, the Koch brothers. Episode 2 was about oil. Koch Pipeline Company and Flint Hill Resources are two companies owned by Koch brothers. There's a steel episode. There is Koch Steel. There are waste and sewers episodes. Those are 2 different episodes. Koch Chemical Tech makes sewer purification and waste and pollution control equipment. And then, we have episodes about things like aircraft, electricity, entertainment. And while Koch might not be directly owning those companies, they certainly provide a lot of raw materials and integral parts in all of these industries. They make automotive glass, cloths, acrylics, different plastics, coatings, chemicals, minerals, steel, everything that you can think of that goes into these things. Like big mining machinery, small machines, what else? Data center equipment, and so on and so forth. And with this show, Mike Rowe basically ran pro-corporate and pro-industry commercials, which were for those entire industries. It wasn't even just like, this is an ad for Georgia Pacific. I don't think Georgia Pacific came up in that episode, but it was for the lumber industry. It was for the, automotive and oil and steel. And Koch is so buried in these industries, and Shell is, and API is, that you can't take away them owning those companies from what was being shown in these episodes. Uh, with the show, he helped, I guess, entertainment wash some of the worst companies on the planet and some of the worst people on the planet. And they even highlighted some companies that are some of the most dangerous for workers and some of the most destructive for the natural environment that we have on this planet. It's just horrible, demonic people and companies. And again, his biggest funder of this Fox show, they were Coke Industries and oil companies. That says something. Shell and the Chamber of Commerce were heavily involved in funding these shows, and I believe that they both actually fund his what do you call it? His trades foundation, and so does API, right? The Koch brothers, just to touch on them for people who aren't aware who they are straight up ghoulish monsters. They are maybe the most significant force, or have been the most significant force on the conservative side of things for like 2-3 decades. At least financially, right? They funded everybody from Rush Limbaugh to Fox News. They have their ghoulish, gross fingers in everything from like corrupting politicians to reducing taxes on the wealthy to introducing right-to-work laws in states across the country. And they've even been involved in anti-LGBTQ legislation. They've been heavily involved with deregulating industries. They've denied the climate change issues for the entirety of their careers. And Mike Rowe, just to further exemplify his, I guess his conservative, anti-worker bona fides, he actually cut a Koch-funded political ad against the PRO Act. And this was a well-produced ad, and it was very well distributed by the powers that be. The PRO Act, for people who don't know, it's a bill that continues to languish in Congress because, of course, our Congress people suck in politics and all that stuff. But it's actually a great bill that would fundamentally help the labor movement in this country. And not by a small margin either. It's a really good bill. And Mike Rowe didn't just oppose it. He actually created a propaganda video to help derail it. And he did this because the PRO Act would have helped workers, right? He opposes the PRO Act because it is opposed by the people who pay him so much money. He is not pro-worker. He's pro-business, pro-boss, and pro-industry. And he's pro-capital. Ever since Dirty Jobs, Rowe has been very careful to form and maintain the image I've talked about a few times. A very particular image, that of a blue-collar, run-of-the-mill, roughneck sort of dude, but always being careful to hide his conservatism. Now, if anybody asked him directly about that in his interviews, he would say, no, I'm not blue collar. Those guys, the real blue collar workers, are the real heroes here. I'm just highlighting their work on TV. That's all I'm doing. But when he goes on like Fox News, they never ask. When he goes on conservative radio or TV shows, they never ask. When he goes on Joe Rogan, he doesn't really ask. And, I don't remember, I watched a bunch of interviews leading into this. I don't really remember a time anyone brought it up as I gorged way too much of this stuff leading into this. And by not asking, by not talking about it, they let it just hang there. This carefully crafted blue-collar image. They let it hang there and do its work. And to do its work on the conservative mind which is watching him, because this guy is not going on a lot of leftist shows, right? And these people, they soaked it up. They, I guess the problem here with this whole thing is that if you look at this outwardly blue-collar looking guy, this sort of living avatar of what the, I guess, conservative, or what the, the average white collar, lifelong cubicle worker thinks of as, sort of quote unquote a real working man, right? They tend to take, because they believe the image, they tend to take everything that Mike Rowe says as the truth. They believe him. I do not. Tucker Carlson himself, who goes on a show wearing plaid fleece shirts to make people forget about his ultra-privileged upbringing, the absurd salaries he made for years on Fox, and his generational wealth that his family has, not to mention his certainly baby soft hands that have never done a day's work in their life. He never mentions Coke funding when he's talking to somebody like Mike Rowe. He never talks about Shell or API funding these things when he talks to Mike Rowe. Because Tucker Carlson gets the exact same funding as Mike Rowe. And if we see that these people are being paid to promote, we see who's paying them to say what, we can clearly see that he is doing corporate propaganda. And this, of course, is ignored by Fox. It's ignored by people like Carlson. It's ignored by people like Rogan, if he even thinks about it. I don't know. He probably doesn't. I don't think he's all that bright. Because if they did not ignore it, then the propaganda would not hit as hard. It would fall far more flat than it does. Mike Rowe is paid by wealthy people, and he's paid by immensely wealthy industries, and both of these fund sources use him to represent their interests. It is embarrassing to not be able to see that, to not see right through what's going on. And even worse is some of these people actually see it. Some of them even know it because they also do it, but they don't talk about it. That is extremely sad. And one of the more egregious things that Rowe promotes, at least to me, is this really twisted idea he throws out of there, which he calls safety third. Most of us view safety as safety first, right? It's like kind of the motto in every building in the world, every workplace in the world. Safety first. Like basically make it home, leave here unhurt, leave here alive. That's first and foremost. That is the right way to think about it. Mike Rowe does not agree with that. He says safety third. Now, I will say that he does give some nuance here. He's not a complete monster. He says safety third as a way to kind of like shock us to listen to what he's saying, right? Safety third, what is that? And then he can explain it to you. But his explanation is kind of ridiculous as well. His view is that safety is primarily the responsibility of individuals. Only we can decide whether we do something dangerous or not, and whether we cut corners or ignore warnings or whatever.
I go into the wheelhouse and I say to the captain, "Hello, OSHA?" And he looks at me and he kind of laughs and he points out the window and he says, "Ocean." And I'm like, no, I get it. You're all very brave and it's dangerous, but seriously, when do we stop working? It's dangerous out there. Yeah. And this guy said something to me I'll never forget. You'll never hear it in the lower 48. But he said, "Son, I'm the captain of a crab boat. My job is not to get you home alive. My job is to get you home rich. You want to stay safe? That's on you. Be careful out there." I made sure everything in the way of safety gear was on right. I took no chances because for the first time ever, the boss told me
That's fascinating.
that my well-being was my responsibility. And I don't think we hear that quite enough.
Okay, so I mean, on the face of it, okay, there's some truth there. We can make decisions on our own. There's nothing wrong with saying that. But the point of making regulations isn't to make a workplace completely safe through those regulations, through compliance. The point is to get the bosses of these places to make sure that individuals actually take and make the right decisions. The captain that we heard there, right, he said that you being alive is not my job. My job is to make sure that you get paid. This is nonsense. The boss's number one job should be make sure your employees aren't getting hurt and dying. Safety first. That's primary. The boss's job isn't to say, hey, there's some safety stuff in that bucket over there. It's up to you to deal with it. They need to make sure that their employees use the safety equipment, know how to use the safety equipment, and know how to help each other use the safety equipment, and know how to work together with the safety equipment so that they're safe. It's not just about saying, hey, there's a shiny vest over there, there's some safety harnesses, do whatever you want to do, it's up to you, I'm out of it. No. You make the boss, make the people do the right thing. And the reality is that this, incredibly dumb idea is just another way to smuggle in more of this bad ideology. Well, actually two ideologies if I'm thinking about it. One is that sort of American individuality, the individualism that I was talking about earlier and couldn't pronounce, but I just nailed it like a king. And that individualism is so harmful to society. It's brutal. But the other thing that they're introducing is deregulation. So listen, things like OSHA are actually important. They aren't perfect. Nobody thinks that they're perfect, but they are important. They matter. Things like OSHA and other regulatory industries, they provide a bare minimum, a rock bottom. Regulations are important. Ensure at the point of action, individual workers can make decisions. They can make good or bad decisions, but the point of these sorts of regulations and the agencies which enforce them is to put pressure on the companies to not just provide that bare minimum of safety, but to also actually put pressure on workers to make the right decisions about their own safety. Safety third, despite his protestations and clarifications, is just a stupid thing to advocate, at least in my opinion. This supposedly blue-collar, dirty jobs advocate even fights against the minimum wage. Yes, so, hey, get hurt and don't make enough money.
Part of it has to do with the conversation we've heard around like the minimum wage, right? And so many arguments that attempt to take an entry-level job that was never designed to generate enough income to support you, and belittle that opportunity because it's not a higher rung, right? And so we just entered into this space, I think, where we wanted all of the rungs on the ladder to be absolutely equal. And because they're not, we began to look for scapegoats, right? And we began to look for explanations as to how these lower rungs were somehow marginalized, right? It's just it's goofy.
Yeah.
He also routinely and vehemently repeats the absolute lie about unskilled labor, which is something I hate. It's a term I reject outright. It's just a rhetorical tool which is used by these people to degrade workers and convince them that our time is not worth even $15 an hour, because to them, cooking food or sweeping floors or making French fries, in the classic example, or waiting tables or driving for Uber, they just, doing those as work just doesn't make you worthy of being able to live off your wages, of being able to live in your own apartment maybe, or just have one roommate. He frames these anti-minimum wage as if it's actually workers who don't value low-paying jobs or each other because they weren't designed to be lived off of, which is a BS argument from the start. Like, when you take a job and you can't afford to live, and the workers say, boy, it should be nice to be able to have like a decent, safe place to live and food. That'd be awesome. Maybe some electricity as well. Maybe even do something, go to a movie once in a while. Like, nope. To Mike Rowe, this is, us degrading ourselves and each other by even asking for more money at like a minimum wage level. We should be happy to make $10 an hour and, have 5 roommates in a 2-bedroom apartment because, hey, work is life, right? And life is work. That's all that really matters. And, that actually leads me to another recurring theme of his so-called worker advocacy. He routinely frames work itself in a way which confuses employment with happiness. He conflates working a job, just the act of, going to work as an employee. He mixes it up with meaning, like real meaning, like spiritual meaning. And I guess to expand on how he feels about work in this way, this, meaning and happiness, and work is contentment. Let's look at his absolutely horrific sweat pledge for a minute here before we wrap this episode up. So this document I'm about to show you is something that he makes the people who go through his foundation for trade scholarships, the recipients of these things, they have to sign this pledge. So I'm going to show it to you here. Bang, hey, it worked. So I'm going to go through the pledge. There are 12 of them. I'm going to go through it real fast. But what you'll see is how this document, it reinforces this sort of individualism. Sorry, I just want to pull this up on my laptop here so I can read it. So you'll see how it kind of ignores material conditions and even is like internally inconsistent at times. And it even directly contradicts itself at a couple points, but it is also deeply anti-organized labor, which I think will be clearly obvious once you start hearing these things. Okay, so SWEAT is an acronym. It stands for Skills and Work Ethics Aren't Taboo. It's not even clever. Moron. All right, so sorry. That was Mike Rowe I was talking to, by the way. All right, so number 1. I believe that I have won the greatest lottery of all time. I am alive. I walk the earth. I live in America. Above all things, I am grateful. I mean, this is how it starts, right? This is the prime directive of the sweat pledge. Just straight up preachy nonsense. And, I guess I should point out that although Rowe frames so much of what he talks about as people succeeding and failing based on their own choices, it starts off with, I won a lottery, right? So he admits that it's a lottery, that where you're born, like what you're born in, or actually he doesn't say what you're born into, but just being born in America to him is the greatest lottery win of all time, right? This acknowledges that where you're from actually matters. And we can even shrink that down to like what sort of neighborhood you live in, what sort of family you have. It all matters, right? He will go on to contradict this idea later, and I'll tell you about it then, but he actually mentions, maybe he doesn't realize it, but he mentions things like material conditions here. He brings it up. He'll never do it again, but it's there. So number 2, I believe that I am entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Nothing more. I also understand that happiness and the pursuit of happiness are not the same thing. So, I mean, this is like saying you have access to healthcare, but no healthcare, right? It's meaningless nonsense. You can pursue happiness, I guess, but you can chase that shit. But we'll see. We'll see if you get it or not. Number 3, I believe that there is no such thing as a bad job. Bad job in scare quotes. A lot of stuff here is in scare quotes for some reason. I believe that all jobs are opportunities and it's up to me to make the best of them. Y'all, let's just be very clear. There are bad jobs for sure. All right, do not believe this nonsense. I myself have had bad jobs. And number 4, and this is where they start to get a little weird, a little sick. Number 4, I do not follow my passion. Again, scare quotes. I bring it with me. I believe that any job can be done with passion and enthusiasm. So first off, this goofball is telling you, don't chase your passion. And he chased his passion and he caught it. He freaking won. Right? He has that college degree that he'd call useless and crappy and pointless, and he used it and he won. Homeboy won. He got it. He got the bag, man. He acted, he sang, he was on TV. Now he's just a weird motivational speaker in a blue-collar costume. And now he's telling you not to follow your dreams, not to follow your passions, because your passions, you chasing your passions, will not help the billionaire class, which is paying him to do all of this work. This is a dude who, he never had to climb into a scrapyard sewer and clean it, right? He never had a slop bucket hoisting over his head and dumping like nasty, slimy, gross water onto his head. You know, he never had to do that. Or actually, maybe he did. He'd do dirty jobs, but he'd do them for one day, a few times a year. And it didn't matter if he did it well or liked it, because he knew he was going back to the Four Seasons or the Red Roof Inn or wherever the hell they stayed at the end of the day, and that it wouldn't matter. And when I was in that sewer, hip deep and slimy, muddy, gross, coagulated nonsense mess of a gross just pit of stink, there was no passion there, trust me. There was no passion. Nor should there have been passion. I was cleaning a sewer with a bucket. In short, chase your dreams, go for it. You know, chase them until you can no longer chase them. I'm not saying starve in your car or starve in futility, but don't ignore them either, man. Make a go of it, please. Go for it. Number 5, I deplore debt and do all I can to avoid it. I would rather live in a tent and eat beans than borrow money for a lifestyle that I cannot afford. And screw you, Mike. This is just bullcrap. This is just a weird avocado toast thing all over again. I mean, seriously, screw Mike Rowe. This is just nonsense. This is just idiotic nonsense that sort of reinforces that, you know, that judgmental Karen that you see on TikTok when she sees somebody who she doesn't think has enough money buying something nice at the store and freaks out. This is that. It's just more. It's just more of this idiotic idea that if you don't have a lot of money, then you should have nothing nice. Like, man, if you need a loan to keep living indoors, it's okay. Take a loan. You can. I mean, Jesus Christ, just. You shouldn't go homeless and eat beans every day before you take a loan out to stay sheltered. It's just, I don't agree with it. Mike Rowe here is a real villain. And again, that doesn't mean do wild stuff and just ruin your life forever financially. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about just people just trying to stay in houses or apartments or whatever, or even in their car if they don't have a home. Man, Mike Rowe sucks. Jesus. Number 6. I believe that my safety is my responsibility. I understand that being in compliance does not mean that I'm out of danger. Okay, right? Yeah, sure. Sure, you can always get hurt. But, you know, again, safety third. The theory that companies being regulated for safety somehow makes workers unsafe because workers are so stupid and so uneducated that they think that a company being in compliance means that they are totally safe and completely taken out of the decision-making process. It's belittling and insulting. And to even write that out on a poster like I'm showing you here, to think that that's kind of, I mean, I guarantee he wrote that sentence. He hit enter on his keyboard and he was just like, bang, nailed it. Because he's not that bright. Screw Mike Rowe. I do not like this man. Number 7. I'm sorry, there are 12 of these. I'm getting through them as fast as I can here. 7. I believe the best way to distinguish myself at work is to show up early, to stay late. Sorry, I can't even read this. Oh my God. All right. To show up early, to stay late, and to cheerfully volunteer for every crappy task that there is. Okay. No. If you have an 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. job, listen to me. You show up at 8:04 and you punch out at 3:55. Do not show up early. Do not stay late. Do not do a single minute of work that you are not being fully paid for, and don't work over 8 hours unless you're getting overtime. Do not do it. Do not give them free time. This is your life. These are your minutes that you have that you're surviving on this rock. Do not give those up for nothing. What was the other thing? Oh, volunteer. yeah. Do not ever, I repeat, ever volunteer. Please do not volunteer. I have never volunteered in my entire career, and now that I have enough seniority to not have to do those horrible jobs, I do not volunteer. It's not a good precedent to set. But obviously, if you listen, obviously, if you're in a position where you need cash and volunteering gets you paid more, gets you more hours, more days, more whatever, more overtime, certainly volunteer. I'm not telling you, I'm not telling you to suffer financially if you don't have to. But if you're not in that position, I don't think that you should be volunteering and coming in early and staying late. And obviously, if you have to, no judgment. We all have to do things. We all have our situations. You're good. I still love you. And you're right in whatever decision you're making. Number 8, I believe that the most annoying sounds in the world are whining and complaining. I will never make them. If I am unhappy in my work, I will either find a new job or find a way to be happy. So listen, I'm not going to tell anybody if they're unhappy not to find a new job. You should. If you can, go for it. But whining and complaining are awesome. They are great. A while back, that me and the boys, well, we have women now that work with us, which is kind of a new thing. So the ladies, the men, we whined and we complained. And guess what we got? We got like a $4 raise one year. And that was awesome. And it was because we whined, and it was because we complained, and it was because we did so loudly and relentlessly for like a full year that we got that raise. Whine, complain, be the squeaky wheel, get things fixed. Make your issues known. I'm not telling you to throw things at your boss or to be insulting, but damn straight, man, get up in their face and tell them what you need, what's wrong, and how they can fix it. Absolutely. Number 9. Sorry. I believe that my education is my responsibility and absolutely critical to my success. I am resolved to learn as much as I can from whatever sources are available to me. I will never stop learning and understand that library cards are free. Sure. I mean, fine. Go learn stuff. Nothing. I don't know if there's anything wrong with that one. It's cool to learn. I read. Right? I watch YouTube videos. I listen to podcasts. I learn stuff. Read, learn stuff if you can. It's awesome. Number 10. Number 10. I believe that I am a product of my choices, not my circumstances. I will never blame anyone for my shortcomings or the challenges I face, and I will never accept credit for something that I did not do. Now, this is my favorite one because it kind of contradicts that Prime Directive one that he had, where he talks about winning the greatest lottery ever just by being born in America. But then here he's saying that the problem is never our circumstances, right? I mean, what's more circumstantial than where you're born, right? You won the birthplace lottery, but you're saying circumstances don't matter all of a sudden. Did Mike Rowe choose to be born in Maryland? Which is, I know that's where he grew up, but did he choose to live in Maryland if the parents moved there? No. Did I choose to be born in Massachusetts? No, it just happened. Did I choose to be born into, a two-parent home? No. Did I choose for my parents to get divorced when I was little? No. Things happen, right? Now, I'm not saying that you should unrealistically blame other people for screw-ups you do, right? I mean, I think that's pretty common sense. Take responsibility, do what you can. But it's like when he says that you will not blame other people for the what was the word he used, for challenges, anyone for the short. I'm not going to blame other people for my shortcomings, but I might for the challenges I face. What if other people put them there? Right? There are times when you can definitely not blame, but that somebody put something there. It's their fault. It's okay to say, yeah, this guy's screwing me over. He's in the way. So in short, I don't like 10. Number 11, understand the world is not fair, and I am okay with that. I do not resent the success of others. This is just more conservative nonsense. This is just a more benign version of people who say yeah, I realize that the world is set up, systematically in a way that's unfair, in a way that actively harms people, even people like me. But instead of trying to make that thing better, I'm just going to sell my soul and sell out and try to win the game, right? And become part of the problem because that's easier, that's more comfortable. And I just don't agree with people like that. And it also frames this thing as trying to improve these systems that we live under. That if you want to do that, then you must be jealous, or you must resent people who have done better, or be angry with people who are billionaires or whatever. Be jealous of them. They say that rather than ever just thinking, ever considering that maybe there's such a thing as like a wholesome, loving attempt to create a better, happier, more resilient world. And, as for me, I'd rather try to unapologetically make the world a better place rather than trying to win a corrupt, horrible game and amass power in it, right? To make my life a little bit better. Maybe I'm a total jerk for that. I don't know. I'll leave that up to you. Number 12, I believe that all people are created equal. I also believe that all people make choices. Some choose to be lazy. Some choose to sleep in. I choose to work my butt off. Grind, set, Chad shit, baby. I love it. I love grinding. So this is just framing that helps create a downward resentment from those that kind of made it or are trying to make it to those who didn't. if you're, poor or sick or just had horrible luck or you're unhoused or you maybe you just made bad choices too, right? That can happen. But to them, you are lazy. You sleep in. You don't try to work, right? It's just some really kind of sociopathic stuff that just belies the reality of the world. Okay? So the sweat pledge ends with a statement which you are supposed to sign under. It reads, quote, "On my honor, I hereby affirm that the above statement to be an accurate summation of my personal worldview. I promise to live by them." End quote. I wouldn't sign this shit if you put a gun to my head. Okay? This is just absolute nonsense. The entire sweat pledge is nothing more than sort of a long-winded promise that we make to our corporate overlords, our political overlords, that we will let them exploit us and never, ever, ever do something so bold as to, one, complain, to whine about our, in his words, whine about our treatment, or possibly to organize together in an attempt to make all of our lives a little bit better. So now, if it was to quickly read this sweat pledge, they might be forgiven for thinking like, hey, most of that is sort of common sense, right? And some of it is, and it looks it when you skim over it. But the overarching theme when you dig a little bit deeper is that the pledge smuggles in some extremely toxic anti-worker messaging, right? A common sense thing is to be careful at work. Cool. Common sense. We all agree. Then we hit, number 7, where it says to work extra time for free to impress your bosses. It goes on to say, like, it's all individual choices. Don't ever, group together and try to change things. Don't complain. It encourages workers to accept abuse at work. And if you don't accept it, then you are, again, whining, right? And according to numbers 10 and 11, when you find that the world is actively harming you, you better take it, and you better not ever try to fix or improve it. Now, maybe even worse, or I guess maybe even like the worst of all, out of all of this, it's this man who spent his life chasing his passion. He's advising us to not do that. His rules suggest that we should give up our passion and to pursue a job and to chase a living. And that chasing that living is the thing that we should become passionate about. That's where we should put our passion. I swear, the more I listened to this guy, the more I read about him, the more interviews I saw and read, the more convinced I was that he just hates workers on some level. He, sort of valorizes them, but also has this weird, I don't even know if it's like paid or if it's just fundamental to who he is, but he has some sort of issue with people working, getting together and saying, you know what, we need to make this place better. Mike Rowe can talk about, individual choice and, grinding and how there are no bad jobs, because when he did these jobs, which are often bad, he did them on a TV show and they were fake. The whole thing was fake. He could goof around and even be bad at these jobs because it didn't matter. He wasn't actually a worker. He wasn't actually an employee. He was, on one hand, giving these people free publicity, and on the other hand, he was just acting. And because of that, he could break things, and he did break things. He could waste product, and he did waste product. Some of the stuff is very expensive, and he would just waste it, and everybody would laugh because it was a TV show. And he could be so bad at his job and take it so unserious because he couldn't be fired. He could glorify 14-hour days, dawn to dusk work, and doing even unsafe things at work, and say safety is third. I mean, why not fourth or fifth, right? Because Mike Rowe doesn't have to worry about balancing work life, and he doesn't have to worry about a medical bill if he gets hurt, and he doesn't have to worry about getting fired because he screws up. Now, I can't say this loudly enough, but Mike Rowe can put safety third or fourth or fifth and say it's only up to the individual workers, because Mike Rowe won't feel any stress at all if he breaks a leg. No worry about the bill because he has enough money to pay it. No worry about time off because he's a freaking actor and he's already rich, and like he could work with a broken leg at his foundation. It doesn't matter. There's no worry about losing his job because he's not there. There's no worry about battling an unemployment system that hates to pay you. He's become, and maybe is, like in his heart, a conservative grifter, cosplaying as a blue-collar tradesman, and he has completely lost touch with the reality of the American middle and lower class workers, even as he is held up as an avatar of that same group of people, and even as he dresses like them. Mike Rowe does not tout pro-labor issues because labor is not paying him. He doesn't do it because he is not a worker. Billionaires and their companies pay him to do the opposite. They pay him to always be pro-boss, always be pro-capital, always be pro-corporation. Mike Rowe talks about regular people, blue-collar workers, people like me, and he almost deifies them. And he like almost deifies their jobs as well. And he does it with his kind of down-home rhetoric about hard work and dirty jobs and trades and all of that stuff. But after that, after all of that praise, after all of the blue-collar praise, the dirty jobs, how important it is to be a blue-collar worker, how important it is for working class, he always sides with the bosses every single time. Always the boss, never the worker. Always on the side of the powerful and never on the side of the exploited and the downtrodden. And this is very important to understand. He denigrates organized labor and then glorifies the independent contractor. He glorifies the freelancer, the labor Ronin out there selling his time, his very hours on this planet to whichever feudal corporate lord will pay him just enough to live but not enough to really survive. Or actually, I guess it goes the other way: enough to survive but not to really live. Then Mike Rowe expects that worker to work early off the clock, stay late off the clock, and volunteer to do all the crap work. He wants them to do all of that to impress the boss. And then he wants them to get on their knees and thank the boss for letting them struggle that much. He's always on the side of the individuals doing the exploiting, right? He's always on the side of the exploiters, and he's never on the side of the groupers who are being exploited and who want to work with each other to improve their lives. He's actively against them. He talks about working for free, about taking crappy jobs, and he criticizes those who don't as being individually lacking, and he calls them whiners and complainers, and he says that they're lazy and they don't wake up early enough. But he never discusses things like class. He never discusses material conditions. It's always the workers' fault, never the boss's. He romanticizes workers doing dirty jobs, unsafe jobs, and then he dismisses workers getting together to make their lives better. It's really important. That's why I keep repeating it. He is a self-described friend of the living Koch brother. I think it's Charles Koch. Both Koch brothers are demons The surviving one is still a demon, and Mike Rowe is chums with him. It's bad. That's not good. Mike Rowe worked blue-collar jobs for one day each, a few times a year, right? And he got so much praise for it that I think that he might actually believe somewhere in that like coke money addled brain of his that he really is the avatar of hardworking America. You know, every time he pulls those blue jeans on and rolls up at the sleeves of that Carhartt button up and puts on that faded ball cap, this guy really believes that he's... I'm glad I had this here. Put my hat on. I think that he really believes that he is that, you know, busted knuckle, greasy handed, like salt of the earth, regular guy, dirty job working American man that the costume represents. And I guess the question that brings up, that is, I guess it's important to talk about, but I don't think matters, is does Mike Rowe actually believe in what he's saying? Is he a true believer? I think he does believe. I don't think he's secretly like a leftist or a weird Marxist or a liberal or anything. I think that he genuinely believes this garbage. But even if he didn't, even if he was just taking the money and saying what he has to say to please the people who keep giving him that big bag of money, you know, like either way, I don't think it matters. Mostly because whether he's a true believer or not, he's saying it. And by him going out there and saying it, the damage is just the same. He's being paid by billionaires to tout their policies, to expand their, or to explain and expose and advertise their worldview. He's being paid by billionaires to defame organized labor, to push anti-worker policy, anti-labor policy, and to convince workers to put safety third. I can't get over the safety third thing. Like, despite all of his kind of backtracking on that, it's just a freaking stupid thing to do. And he's even dipped his toe into anti-LGBTQ fear-mongering. He's doing all of that. Whether he's a true believer or not, he is doing it. Mike Rowe is harming American workers and supporting billionaires, corporations, and capital in general along the way. Now, there is something, I think, incredibly dystopian about an actor making millions of dollars by getting the sort of degree that he disparages, right, an art degree, and then dressing up in a carefully thought out costume that's a mockery of a stereotypical working man. And then telling people while he's wearing that costume that any personal passion or decision that doesn't make you a more valuable worker or a more exploitable worker is useless. That is what Mike Rowe is doing to the American worker, to the American blue-collar worker, to the people that do the dirty jobs that he at one time seemed like maybe he genuinely did want to shine light on. He's hurting those people. So in short, fuck Mike Rowe. That's it. Peace out, guys.